leaders in the arena. My name is Jenny Whitener. I'm the founder of Bridgett Innovate. It's our pleasure to have you with us today. Bridgett Innovate hosts Leaders in the Arena webinars and podcast series dedicated to sharing inspiring stories with leaders around our region. And today we have a very special guest with us. Bridgett Innovate is focused on empowering teams to lead, think, and problem solve differently. We do that in a number of ways, from our consulting services to our future lab design sprints to learning and leadership programs. And then we just have a really cool studio right outside of Chattanooga where you can come and work and be inspired. But today, we are thrilled to have with us a very special guest and a friend of mine that I've had the pleasure of teaming up with on and off for over a decade, Bridgett Massengill. Bridgett is the president and CEO of Thrive Regional Partnership, and today she's going to be talking to us about yes and thinking, cultivating growth and community and leadership. Bridgett, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. It's so nice to be here.
It's great to have you. Just, starting off, could you help the audience know a little bit more about yourself? You have well over a decade of experience in working and activating change in communities, but help them understand a little bit more about your background.
Absolutely. I think it's always interesting when you're in community work. You don't really know what that trajectory is going to look like. You don't know where it's going to lead. You don't know how you end up where you do, which is really what we're going to be talking about today. For me, the very root of it began when I was finishing up college here in Chattanooga at UTC, University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and I went to work for the mayor at the time, who was Gene Roberts, when the city was going through an absolute transformative time in its history, reshaping its identity and doing a lot of things around innovation before it was popular to do the things they were doing. So I learned a lot back then. I went from there to Nashville. I worked at the state legislature and was able to help provide resources and programming information for the legislators around things that had to do with economic development, tourism, transportation, all the things that really I focus on today. Left there, went to Johnson City, was the executive director for the Johnson City Development Authority, and got to really roll up my sleeves and work hand in hand with community on how to revitalize its downtown. Had another history there of going and starting with the Tennessee Downtowns program across Tennessee as a consultant. Ended up back here in Chattanooga, and I've been with Thrive since 2012 in its inception year.
I remember that. We were teaming up at that time. So how exciting. I mean, when you think about it, you've really been an activist for change and really empowering communities to be their very best for some time. Talk to us more. Give us a little bit of context before we get into the meat of our discussion today on yes and help the audience know more about Thrive Regional Partnership and kind of where you are now and the efforts that you're leading.
I want to say one thing that's really driven this philosophy, and it will kind of lead into who Thrive is and what we do. Even back in my days when I was working hand in hand with the community in Northeast Tennessee, I really latched onto a quote by Rosabeth Mock-Cantler, I think it's her name, and it is: change is debilitating when done to you, but exhilarating when done by you. And that has shaped and driven my approach to communities and transformation and engaging. And that is what we do here at Thrive today. It is all about activating community members. It's all about, in this case, activating a region. And what you see up right now is our mission statement, or what Thrive has been doing, has been focusing on for over a decade now, where we do work to inspire responsible growth through conversation, which is all about that engagement, connection, which is all about connecting people and processes to one another, and collaboration across this tri-state region. You see what our footprint is there. When we kind of pair this up in the context of yes and thinking, you can already see from that we are, yes, it is about Southeast Tennessee and Northwest Georgia and Northeast Alabama and the 16 counties that encompass that footprint. When you go to the next, you're going to see on that next slide who we're engaging. This is another critical component to how we've been thinking since our inception. We convene stakeholders that really work to ensure there's two elements here that while we're growing in industry, prosperity, and population, which this region is doing at a very fast, accelerated pace, that we are also and preserving both community and natural character for generations to come.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things, just to interject there, one of the things I love about what Thrive is doing is that you bring this end of responsible growth and preserving the community you bring it to the forefront in a way that people are imagining working together. They're bringing their different perspectives. It's not confrontational. You've invited people to bring their whole self, their whole perspective, to convene for the better good. And I don't know if like you're handing out magic wands or whatever, but there is a way that you're approaching this convening that in many environments, I see constituencies coming together and having really tough discourse or disagreement. But the approach that Thrive has taken has got some magical component. I know we're going to get to that a little bit later, but some magical component where people really open up, learn about each other's perspective, and then think together about how to go forward. I really think that's been powerful of what you're doing. What else is happening at Thrive?
So this photograph there on the right is a classic example of that. It's always been rooted in engaging the people in creating those action plans and those strategies, and never been about a top-down approach. It's always been about engaging the community in these processes, which means it is a requirement that we include everyone at the table. This is not about one interest or one approach to how we grow. I think sometimes we find ourselves stuck in silos, and our organization has worked hard to de-silo these conversations. So if you go to the next slide, I'd like to think of it as we're looking at growth with a different approach. Because even back in the days when I was working primarily in downtown revitalization work, honestly, I wasn't thinking about what you see here off in the background. I wasn't thinking about the mountains. I wasn't thinking about the scenic beauty. I wasn't even thinking about the interstate corridors that were getting people into the downtown.
Right.
But in this case, the approach that we are taking is about the place, which encompasses all of those things: the beauty, the outdoors, the river, the roads, everything that makes up place is what matters. And those lands that you see out in the distance, they matter. And so we've been taking a different approach to how we tackle those issues, and absolutely making it a safe place to have oftentimes uncomfortable conversations. When you're rooted in what matters most to people, you can do a lot of different things when you're thinking about issues that are facing your community, and in our case, this entire region.
Right. I also see that when you're convening individuals around this broader conversation, that you're intentionally giving them opportunity to build relationships. I think that we can encounter and have more productive conflict, if you were to think of it that way, or sharing diverse perspectives when we have genuine respect for each other, when we know each other. And I feel like that when you're inviting us in our region to go at this a different approach, that you give time to building relationship and then inviting the conversation. I see that as something that really powerfully you're doing that not all entities are able to do.
I often say progress moves at the speed of trust, and trust is built by relationships, and relationships are at the core of what we do to inspire that responsible growth. We don't take trust lightly. It is at the core of building those relationships, and it has taken us time to build those relationships across the region. And it is truly because as we listen to the voices of the region, we respond in a way that we hope is in the voice of this region.
Right.
If you go to that next slide, you'll see the three lenses that we like to look at things at. I think oftentimes when you're thinking about growth in one perspective only, you can take an example of that first one on there, the infrastructure. You can say, you know what, traffic is awful right now. So I'm going to get the transportation planners out there to go fix it. And they come into that situation with only the transportation lens on. Mm-hmm. And they're thinking, okay, so we're going to widen this road. We're going to build this asphalt. We're going to do this to make this more usable. But they're not always naturally, just by design, thinking about how that might affect the community character, how it might affect the natural character. And so that's just one example of how we look at this with these three lenses and bring those three different perspectives to the common table so that we can have those very conversations and be thinking about how all three of these, which can be very, very different approaches. They can be the no only.
Right.
And we flip that script.
Right. And I think this is powerfully where you invite them to say yes and, right? And have that kind of conversation. What else? I mean, I know recently I had a chance to attend the Tri-State Summit, which thematically was positioned as yes and. I thought it was wonderful. The session was great. Thank you for hosting it for our region. Talk to me a little bit more about how this yes and came to life at the summit and the power that it brought to conversation.
So it's always funny when you realize that you might think that, we're doing something innovative. And then you find out that, oh, wait, there has been this improv of yes and around for decades. And you're just finding out about it. And it's almost like you're feeling seen for the first time by this establishment, which happened to be this yes and concept. So we launched the yes and concept and determined, it is an improv piece. And we think, I've always thought of improv as Saturday Night Live, right? Like that's what the comedians do.
Right. Absolutely.
But as we learned about it, we learned about the creativity that comes behind it. And we learned about the desire to really begin to have those open-minded co-creation processes, whether it be in improv for entertainment, or whether it be in placemaking work like what we're doing today, and how those interact. And so when we were putting together this conference, it was all about the idea that we want, and you can see it there in our logo on the right-hand side. Yes, it's about that mountain. It's about those hiking. It's about those hiking up the mountain or rock climbing up the hill. And it's also about that semi-truck that's traveling along the river that's carrying people and products to your company or your front door. And yes, it is also about the native plants that you can see over there in the bend. And it is about the built environment of our historic downtown, our built environment of our communities throughout the region. And it is about the Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia, which you see in all three of those signs. And so that was at the root of what we wanted to do. And we wanted to provide a space where everybody could come together. And no matter what lens they're coming from, we were going to be able to provide that comprehensive lens to provide a clarity that doesn't come without all at the table.
Mm-hmm. And I really felt that at the conference. I think often in the world of complexity, we might defer to complex tactics and solutions to solve a problem. But when we step back, something is very powerful about the simplicity of this approach of yes and. And that's what struck me, that certainly it has some origin in the improv arena, but bringing it forward is a simple yet powerful tool to help people have conversation with different perspectives and to explore together. I think one of the things that you and I have really valued in our years when we've had a chance to work together is this dreaming, the imagining, the envisioning of a future, and where all three of those lenses that you're inviting people to discuss and explore come together. And it's the power of the and, right? And how do we give and take, or how do we understand each other's perspective? How do we imagine something yet more powerful through
Yes.
the and lens than staying stuck in our domain, right? So I love the simplicity. I love the power of it. And I felt it in the room when you guys were hosting the summit. So thank you. And keep doing it, right? Keep talking about this. Yes, and it's so great. Talk to me more about how you're bringing action to life at Thrive.
So this is a great example of some of the things that we do. And yes, we can talk about future foresights and freight. So you see on there. Yes, we can talk about what is happening on our roads and what I believe is the most pressing challenge that we have right now to our infrastructure system and the ultimate growth of our region, which is the high volume of freight that's moving through this region. And we can talk about how art can be a tool for change, which we did with our Thriving Communities program that you and I partnered on many years ago. It's
Yes.
a fantastic way for communities throughout this entire logistics hub of the Southeast to really see how art could literally revitalize their community. And we're seeing the ripple effects of that continuing to sprout throughout highly manufacturing communities, but also artistic communities. And then, yes, we can create space to talk about economic development and conservation, which you see here with our Cradle of Southern Appalachia Conservation Blueprint. We have that within our Resilient Communities program, where we work with community members about the resiliency issues that they are having with weather-related events that are happening across this region. And we can even bring a former United States Senator to the stage to talk about his traditional conservative approaches that also included economic development in outdoor recreation and the beauty of the outdoors and what he saw happening across all three states here. And you see a photograph of him sitting in front of the native plant display that we had sitting up on the stage. There is power in a movement that encompasses all of these things. And that is, in essence, how the work that we do has to encompass all of these things and give you an idea. And people often say, wait, you guys are about transportation? I don't understand. I'm thinking traditional placemaking work. Heck yeah, we are, because it matters to the place that we live.
Right. I love the fact that you are acknowledging the challenges and the assets, right? So what are the challenges and opportunities in our community? What are the assets of our community? And then inviting this conversation where those come together, where people imagine new futures, new capabilities that respect those things. Earlier today in our talk, you talked about this concept of hope. And I think that there's so much divide that is occurring in our communities right now. And we have channels that help us stay in our lane, whether they're like reinforcing social media channels where people think just like me and they connect, or if it's a community of people that I work with on the project that I'm passionate about. There are lots of channels that keep us in our domains and in our lanes, but there are not as many channels that bring us together around the things that matter so that we can have these conversations and we can dream together and imagine together so that there's better hope and opportunity for the entire place, that entire place. And so I think that it's very exciting that what you're doing and convening people. And I love the fact that, yes, and it's bringing hope to our communities. Talk a little bit more about that, because, we've said that that's a movement that you've been doing for some time and it came to life in the tri-state region, conference. But can you give me some more specifics if I wanted to do that, my own organization? How do you do that? How do you do this yes and thing?
I think, first of all, there's a great book and it's called Yes and we actually put that as a part of the conference too and invited people to read it. And I would highly recommend, if we drop it in the show notes, like a link to that book, because it changes that entire perspective and says that practicing improvisation is like yoga for your professional development.
Yoga for professional development. I love that.
Because it's going to teach you, it's strengthening the emotional intelligence, but it's teaching you how to pivot out of tight and uncomfortable spaces. And no matter what you're dealing with in your work, in your frame of reference across this world, you're going to be found in tight and uncomfortable spaces. And it teaches you how to pivot out of those. And then helps you to become a more compelling leader and a more collaborative follower, which is really important. And it is kind of weaved through that concept. And it teaches you about the idea of ensembles. And when you're thinking about working as a team, creating ensembles that might have a different leader for a different purpose, a different goal. It takes out the hierarchy to a degree. It says there's going to be a time where it might be your executive assistant that is now the lead of the team. It doesn't matter if you're the CEO of the company. There's times you have to fall back and be a follower. And I'll tell you from that conference, I was certainly the follower of the team. They were running the show.
That was great. That was great. Yeah, I think it's very interesting that when you talk about this, this conversation, having these ability to get people to think in this yes and. I want to acknowledge one of the slides we showed earlier in the conversation. You had people kind of working around like with Post-it notes and whiteboards and dreaming together. And I really think that often conferences give speakers like positions to pontificate. I'm not trying to derail or talk bad about other conferences, but it's more like stating an opinion, right? This is where I stand. And that creates polarization. Whereas I feel like that you've intentionally created environments where people co-create, this concept of co-design. And, that's something that you and I share a lot of passion around. We both believe that when we co-create, people own solutions, they activate those solutions, change will really happen. And so I don't know how you do that, but because you do it across states, but you are really facilitating co-creation and co-design. How do you do that?
I love that because you're literally speaking to the co-creation component, which is so critical. And the idea behind that improv approach is that dialogues push stories further than monologues. So when you were talking about people will stand at a stage and they will talk to you, it's a monologue.
Right.
It doesn't push the story. It doesn't create that collaboration. It's literally about creating dialogues of meaningful significance and allowing every person's perspective to have a place to co-create. And co-creation is what it's all about, because if we're talking about community, everyone has a seat at the table. And it's when we kind of shift those power dynamics and we sit back and we say, well, this change, to go back to that quote, is being done to me. There's nothing I can do about it.
Right.
You're not going to see the change that you can create when you sit equitably at the table and start talking about the things that matter most and being a part of that change, which is co-creation. And really, that's the only way to do community development work.
Well, we've talked about that, and we're like singing the same hymn, right? Co-creation. But, in being realistic, there are many times that people come to the table for very structured differences, very anchored differences. And what's your experience? What advice would you have for organizations or communities who are approaching individuals who are really stuck on those differences? How do you bring them forward?
I think the most important component that anytime you are brave and courageous enough to set the table for those conversations where people are coming with their one perspective, because it does take bravery and courage to hold those. A lot of people run from that. When you host that conversation, you need to walk into it first and foremost with the muscle of listening. Listening is the most important component that we often forget. And so if we are going to create, if we are going to communicate, we often come with that one-sided perspective and our ears are shut off.
Right.
But it is an absolute priority for anyone who wishes to create, to communicate, to lead, or even to manage your teams effectively. And we have to think, are we listening to respond? Are we listening to Am I just thinking about how I'm going to counter what they have to say?
Uh-huh.
Or am I listening without, I may not have a response. Sometimes I think that's the most powerful moment. And we're
Right.
so afraid of that.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I think I love the fact you're calling us to have courage, right? And bravery. I think that's fantastic. And then, it makes me think of the wisdom from I've been in the leadership development field for a long time, and one of my favorites over the years has been the Covey materials, the 7 habits of highly effective leaders, where one of those fundamentals is seek first to understand and then be understood. And I've always carried that with me. I'm not as very good at it all the time. Like I'm a very big extrovert, so I'm a big talker. But I know that, and I try to be cautious of that as an individual. But I think the fact that you're inviting us to be brave and courageous and to listen and to really fully understand before we go forward with exploring further. Talk more about I know that we're coming up on some time here, so I want to make sure we get to this concept of generative collaboration, where we, are constantly growing, we're constantly evolving collaboratively. What thoughts do you have for us there around helping other communities do generative collaboration?
Mm. Well, first of all, I mean, you nailed it with constantly. I mean, it's a constant evolution, and I mean, I go back again to thinking there is no one end in. There's not a destination, and I don't want to be cliche to say this, but the destination is really the journey, and it is having that openness and that ability to keep listening and learning, and I think a key component, if you're in a community, you're thinking about how am I going to start this conversation? First of all, always just set the table. Just set the table. We're coming up on Thanksgiving. There's going to be a lot of families that are coming together that don't really want to come together, but you come together, you set the table, and you believe that the conversation is going to go, and you come to that conversation table with an open ear, and you come to listen and to 3 things I would leave you with on this. When you're talking about creating an idea for your community and you come to that table, you set the table. You're going to be looking for the idea, not your idea. It isn't your idea. I mean, you've got to walk into those conversations with that first and foremost. It is going to be the idea.
Right. Be willing to be illuminated, right? Be willing to be inspired. Seek that inspiration, not just of your own wisdom, but others.
Second, you're going to seed control. Oh my goodness, that is so hard. And I think a lot of times in leadership positions across communities, you almost feel like you have to be the one in control because you're thinking they're expecting that. But it is a much more powerful leader move to back up and say, I acknowledge I'm not in control. In fact, you guys are. It's a very vulnerable position to be in, but it's an important one. Because the third is eradicating fear. And I really learned that from you, Jenny, when we learned through the design thinking methodology that we needed to be really comfortable with failure. And people walk in and they are scared to death of failure and they're fearing it. But we have to fail in order to create. Without failure, the creativity process falls flat. And I actually told my team that before our summit. I told them a story of how my daughters would go out onto the basketball court when they were in middle school with knee pads and shin guards because their coach wanted to teach them it was okay to dive for the ball and fall. And I said, because it's expected that they're going to fall. And to get comfortable with that. So when we show up for this conference, we are going to have some failures, y'all.
Right.
But if we didn't, then we were not creating. We were not being creative.
Right.
And so getting comfortable with that failure is going to be the thing that allows you to create magnificent things in your community and making sure that everyone that has a seat at the table is comfortable with that truth and understands you as the leader of the conversation at first. Is enabling that environment for the conversation to truly prosper.
Great wisdom. I mean, I remember, my first foray into design thinking over 20 years ago and talking to designers, and they would say, the work is never done. There's always a better iteration. And I think that we in business and in community leadership and civic leadership have to take to heart what you're sharing with us, that it's this constant iteration, testing, learning, evolving. It's the generative to approach your quote. This is Bridgett Massengill. The destination is the journey, right? And that if we see this as a journey, if we know this is a journey, the ability to create, co-create, to test, iterate, learn, and evolve is the journey. And so we're constantly evolving. We're constantly working together to make it better. So thank you, Bridgett, for championing this for our region. And I know you're having much broader impact than just the tri-state region with the work that you're doing. Thank you for sharing wisdom today. I'm going to take this, the destination is a journey. The other big things I heard today was courage, the importance of courage, listening, the co-creation component, and ultimately framing that in the power of yes and. Thank you so much. How can people keep the conversation going with you? How can they be in touch?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I am there on the LinkedIn page, and we've got some magnificent ways of promoting some of the work that we do and the concepts that we are living by each and every day. That's where you can find me, and you can also find a link there to our page for thriveregion.org. And I just look forward to continuing the conversation. And thank you so much for having me today, Jenny.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for being an amazing leader in the arena. See you later. Take care. Thanks again. Bye now.
All right.